I hold a call every 2 weeks with several chiefs of police across the country just to get the pulse of what's going on, and they too are feeling an increase in demonstrations. Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, big areas, but we're seeing them pop up everywhere, and that has a strain on resources, and it sometimes poses a challenge to certain police force because of the number of different demonstrations that are popping up unexpectedly some places, some others are planned, but the current context we live in, with what you're seeing, what's going on around the world, has an effect here in Canada. And I like to say that law enforcement are really stitched up, working together, sharing intelligence, sharing best practices, so we can learn from one another, from one event to another.
There's been a lot of talk about the language people have used at these demonstrations. Are there challenges specifically when it comes to hate speech?
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, because this is a challenge, not only what we're seeing in these demonstrations, but if you look at the threats to elected officials, key government officials as well, a lot of the things that we're seeing in the social media space does not always necessarily meet the threshold for a criminal offense when it comes to hate speech or hate type of crime. And what we're seeing right now is the same thing from these demonstrations we're seeing. We just don't meet the key elements of an offense that would warrant laying charges, criminal charges.
Is it time to look at Canada's hate speech laws?
Well, I'm always open to new legislation. I've mentioned this before when it comes to protecting elected officials and government officials. I think there's more space that there's more work that can be done. And I've said this before, it's something to demonstrate in front of an elected official's office or parliament. But I find that you cross the boundaries when you're doing in front of the schools where your kids go to, or even your residents. I think that meets the criminal threshold. But we're just not there yet, and I think we should have a discussion on how we can improve that and protect our officials.
What do you say to law enforcement? And I know you speak to your policing partners and chiefs of police, and you do talk to the Public Safety Minister, Dominic LeBlanc, as well as other federal officials. When people say police just need to do their jobs, there's enough law on the books that specifies what hate speech is. Police just need to go and enforce the law. What is your response to that?
Well, I would say that I'm of the opinion, with my calls that I'm having every 2 weeks, that police are doing everything they can within the parameters in which we can operate, and are doing a really good job. And I could tell you some of the stories that we're hearing from the chiefs of police of what our frontline police officers are enduring by these demonstrators that do not meet the threshold of criminality, but I would say completely inappropriate in that mindset. So it is a challenging environment, but when you look at it, police has one function to do, but you have to remember that any charges that are laid in some provinces, you need pre-approval by the provincial crown or the federal crown, and that's important. If they feel that there's not enough elements to lay charges, the charge is not going ahead.
What specifically incidents are you talking from the chiefs of police?
Well, I'm not going to go into specifics, but how members are treated, the injuries sustained by some of the police officers during these demonstrations. There's a lot of things that we're focusing on the demonstration and what's going on, but there's a lot of people that are working long hours to ensure that public safety is maintained throughout the country. There's some members that some police officers that get injured when they're facing these demonstrations. So there's a combination of things, and then all the insults that they receive when they're just doing their job.
It feels like policing, and the RCMP included, over the past couple of years has faced quite a bit of demands when it comes to public order policing, whether it's these demonstrations, whether it's what we saw at the convoy here in Ottawa at the border. Does the RCMP have the resources it needs to deal with this kind of level of public action, the public demonstrations we are taking place, almost regardless of what the subject is of this? Does the RCMP have what it needs to do?
Well, I'll tell you, Stephanie, this question's been asked before, but if you ask any chief of police if they have enough resources and enough funding, we'll always say we need more because we want to do more. The reality is, any law enforcement has a set budget and a set amount of resources. And in the RCMP is no different in the sense that we prioritize the task at hand. I'll give you an example. When Roxham Road was at its peak, we had to take 100 investigators from other duties and put them on the border to address this priority. And the priorities changed, and we make sure that we allocate resources to the priority to ensure that public safety is maintained.
On the piece about threats to political leaders, The Justice Minister has, it seems, heard your calls that something needs to change, whether it's a new criminal offense, whether it's a new approach. And the Justice Minister's response has been, we give the RCMP the resources it needs. We have existing law in the books. And essentially the answer is no. What is your response to the Justice Minister saying that when it comes to threats against politicians, which you are protecting them against, you have what you need to do your job?
Yeah, Minister Varani was quite clear that we have all the tools in our criminal code. I would just say that maybe we should revisit it, because with what we are seeing, the fact that what we consider as hateful speech, I think we could push the envelope to see how does this fall within the criminal code, because the tools that we have right now, I don't think are the appropriate tools, some of them, to answer what we're seeing today. And I go back to my example earlier. If you want to demonstrate in front of the minister's elected official office here, that's one thing. But I find when you're taking that to schools or in front of the residents, I think that's when you cross the line, and that's actually harassment.
So what specifically would you revisit in the criminal code? What might be missing, I guess, in terms of language, or what might be missing in terms of the tools?
I would get my team of subject matter experts who've been living this, who've been working with this, to look at what are some of the options that we can propose going forward.
How about bubble zones?
Bubble zones, I think you should put everything on the table. People have a right to demonstrate, but what would that look like in a different context with bringing maybe different legislation?